After the thrilling and emotionally taxing finale for Severance's second season, the big question on everyone's minds was whether there would be a third. It would have been an indecorous move for Apple TV to cancel the series that was breaking records to become its most watched show, and they decided not to make fans wait to find out. On March 21st, the same day the season 2 finale aired, the streamer released the official announcement for season 3, so praise Kier. Like most Severance-related things, this answer leads to lots of new questions. Most importantly, when can we expect to watch the third installment? This isn't a question that can be answered yet, and this won't be the last time you hear me express something like this. The gap between the first 2 seasons famously lasted 3 years, but luckily in interviews, the cast and crew have suggested that Ben Stiller is making an honest effort to make this break shorter. If I had to guess, I would say it's possible that it could be out as early as next year, but given the current trends, 2027 seems more likely. On the positive side, Stiller mentioned in interviews that the season 3 scripts were being worked on while season 2 was still in the middle of airing. If we're talking about things that can't be answered, what's going to happen after the closing scene of Mark S. and Helly R. running down the hallways on the severed floor is a question that is squarely in that bin. The season and its finale explained why Mark made the decision he did. If you think it through, it's something he did in the moment, and something he would do even if it only bought him a few more minutes with Helly. So the implication is they have no plan to speak of. If you read through the post-finale interviews, the show's creator Dan Erickson asserts that it's not as much about Mark choosing between the 2 women as it is about him choosing his innie life and existence, which he has come to value independently of his outie's life. He talked about how the season opened with Mark S. instinctively running to find Ms. Casey when he returned to work in the season 2 premiere, rather than going to look for Helly or his friends. As the season progressed, we watched his priorities shift and his emotional connection to Helly grow. So his decision makes sense. For me, it's not even a choice, which is a nice parallel to the way that the innie's existence is sort of set up. But having said all that, if it's all about his innie existence, that is in no way guaranteed. It's spatially dictated. It's something he's not in control of. And his relationship with Helly requires both of their outies to be willing to show up and let them take over, for lack of a better term. That's the innie's dilemma, which is the reason it's nearly impossible to say what will happen after that cut to red. There is a chance they actually turned the tables. The last time we saw him, Dylan was being backed up by C&M, a rather large department. So it could turn into a siege situation. It's a little hard to imagine how that would play out, but the other side of that is them all heading to the elevators to go home, so yeah, it's hard to say. What's nice here is that this isn't cause for alarm. An open-ended conclusion gives us a lot to think about. It's more of a feature than a bug, and this isn't unfamiliar territory. We found ourselves in the same position at the end of season 1, and that worked out as well as you could have imagined. As far as the immediate next steps for Mark and Helly, that feels a little beside the point when you consider the emotion the ending delivered. But things like, will Gemma get out of the building and find Devin and Ms. Cobel waiting outside, are reasonable questions to ask. Again, this could go either way, but if season 2's ending is about the innies discovering they aren't entirely powerless in their situation, even if they effectively appear that way to us, I'm not sure where Gemma will end up. You can imagine scenarios that make sense on the inside and the outside for this character. The place she's left at is heartbreaking. From her perspective, she just watched her husband choose another woman when she needed him most. If she makes it outside, this can be explained away. From her own experience, she'd understand that it's more complicated than it appears because of Severance. If Lumon were able to stop her from leaving the building, on the other hand, she could potentially become a bargaining chip for them. While Mark ultimately chooses to stay with Helly, he does at least want to help Gemma get outside. His current status as a crazy teenager in love doesn't completely undo the reasons why he was trying to locate Miss Casey as a fellow innie, or what he learned about her imprisonment from his outie in Harmony Cobel. He knew her usefulness to them had run its course. Since I know my regular viewers are on top of this kind of stuff, I should mention that when Dichen Lachman was asked about what was going on with Gemma in that scene, her interpretation was that she knew right away that it wasn't her mark. She thought she was pleading with his innie to try to get him to come through the door so that she could be reunited with her husband and they could leave together. This makes a lot of sense, especially because of the elaborate setup the show concocted so that all the different combinations of their innies and outies could come out during the escape. It's also important to note actors' interpretations aren't always the same as what the writers had in mind, or what they were going for that matter. So that's something to keep in mind whenever you think about what people say in these interviews. As far as the star-crossed lovers, the one thing that stands out in the finale is James Egan's newfound interest in his daughter's innie. It's well established that the Egan family sees the severed work personas as something less than human. So it was a pretty big surprise that he told Helly that she has something that is missing from the rest of his children. After confessing he doesn't love Helena, James says, "I used to see Kier in her, but he left her as she grew." When Helly recounts this for Mark, she tells him, "He said some cryptic shit about the fire of Kier being in me." So the innies picked up on this and might try to use it to their advantage. We know things like the overtime contingency plan exist. Helly R could stay in control outside of the severed floor. Keeping Mark away from his family might be more difficult, but you can never underestimate Lumon's influence. I suppose this is as good a place as any to zoom out and discuss the bigger picture. By now you know that Severance is crafted in the mystery box show mold. It relies on a sense of curiosity and intrigue, mysteries that have layers, and a host of unanswered questions to keep viewers guessing and engaged. It thrives on strategically withholding information, and as I've already mentioned, as it doles out a slow drip of crucial details, important clues, and breadcrumbs to follow, all of which lead to more questions, fans who are so inclined head down rabbit holes to develop theories. In the current environment, this is a tricky proposition, since the lofty highs fans experience while chasing a solution to the puzzle are hard to compete with, and they feel like they've been burned before. Severance's sci-fi premise, being dystopian enough that it's absurd on the face while also something that you can almost believe could exist, was enough to bring people in. The show's been able to keep them there by keeping a handle on its mystery box elements, doing things like delivering some answers along the way, finding a balance there, making it feel like things are progressing toward a satisfying conclusion, all while not just piling on the next mystery to up the ante while having no idea what they're trying to say. More than that, it's worked on developing its characters to drive the mysteries, which helps viewers feel invested. For all the answers we did get this season, things like the numbers in MDR, the goats, and how Gemma ended up on the testing floor, the big mysteries are still largely intact. Season 2 gave us a better understanding of what the Lumon Corporation was looking to achieve by further developing the Severance procedure, something that was hinted at with Gabby in the birthing center in Season 1. But big picture-wise, there's still a lot we don't know about what the Egan family is really out to accomplish. They talked about the completion of Cold Harbor being remembered as one of the greatest moments in the history of this planet. I suppose you could make an argument that creating a severance chip that could offer severance to regular people to avoid anything they saw as painful or inconvenient might fit that bill. But I don't know. It seems like there's more to it. Something more specific to their cult of Kier and the philosophy that goes along with it. In the finale scene where Mark finishes the file and the animatronic Kier congratulates him directly, he tells him he was one of the most important people in history for drawing his grand agendum nearer to fulfillment. What does he mean by that exactly? Similarly, when Mr. Drummond is preparing Lauren to sacrifice that cute little goat a meal, he says they're doing that in service of the Founders' eternal war against pain. Are we supposed to just take this at face value? For all the directions this story might go, Lumon Industries turns out to be the good guys who are just making tough decisions for the betterment of humanity seems like one of the least likely. One of the biggest questions of the series is what the Egans are up to. And I would add is what James Egan is trying to do in line with what Kier set out to do. I mentioned their influence, and it's been suggested more than once that they have their hands in so many pies that it's tough to go up against them. The town is named Kier, and it exists in a fictional state with the abbreviation PE, which appears to be in the United States based on news articles and other in-universe details. The cars are a little off, none of them seem to be manufactured after the 1990s, and people talk a little differently. Are these just supposed to be reminders that it takes place in an alternate, vaguely nowish timeline? These are questions that Dan Erickson gets asked about often and has mostly been able to dodge. The most interesting detail I've come across was from a Q&A where he revealed during the 1930s, the town of Kier was insulated from the rest of the world for an undisclosed period of time, thus explaining why it's behind on modern trends. Whether or not we ever fully understand the town's history, we know that Lumon has a tight grip on it now. Devin was reluctant to go to the local police when she first talked to any Mark in the season 1 finale. Ragabi has said they have people at the hospitals and the morgue, indicating that they have them in other local institutions as well, and we know they have Angelo Arteta, a state senator who supports legalized severance, on their side if not on their payroll. Details like this make it seem pretty likely that things like Drummond's death at the end of season 2 will just sort of go away. That might not lead to any serious consequences for any of the characters involved, but it also makes it seem difficult for Devin and Cobel to do anything with Gemma or raise the alarm about Mark's disappearance. And speaking of Harmony, she spent most of the season on the sideline until we got the big reveal that she came up with the original concept of severance during her time at the Myrtle Egan School for Girls. By the end of the season, she was seemingly helping Mark get to his wife on the testing floor, but her true motivations are still a big mystery as far as I'm concerned. Is she out for revenge? That seems a little too simple. We know Jaime Egan took credit for her idea, and then the company tossed her aside, effectively cutting her off from its development. We also know that while she was losing her mother, she was being indoctrinated in a high control situation and seems to have found something she could grab onto in Kier's philosophy. If you look back at some of what she was doing in season 1 in relation to Mark and Gemma, it's possible things like bringing in the candle to have Miss Casey burn in the wellness session might be hinting that she didn't have confidence in Dr. Maurer and might just be trying to prove his incompetence in an effort to take his place. It seems likely she has a larger agenda, but whether that's about control of her invention, removing James to return Lumon to something that better reflects her beliefs in Kier and what he was trying to do for humanity from her perspective, or something else entirely is pretty up in the air. While she sided with Mark and Devin, she gave them very little information, just what she thought was necessary to get any Mark on board. So I don't think she can be trusted, and I don't think we're supposed to know for sure what she's trying to accomplish yet. Since she didn't explain much, and we don't know what Lumon's or the Egans' next steps would be if Mark's rescue didn't compromise the Cold Harbor data, the testing floor's future is also a question. Watching the season, I felt pretty sure about Gemma being the only subject down there after episode 7, and I just assumed since we saw a door for Tumwater that all the macrodats were refining files related to Gemma. From things I read after the finale, it doesn't seem like that's necessarily the case, or at least it's something the writers left open and wanted us to question. Plus, there are more MDR departments on different severed floors around the world. Will we get a better understanding of how the mysterious and important work is all connected, or was the focus of this story always limited to Mark and Gemma? I mentioned Ragabi, and she's one of the many characters whose future on the show is uncertain. Without knowing which direction things will go after the finale's closing shot, it's hard to say which characters will return. Several new characters felt like they could come back at some point, but if they didn't, their stories would still feel complete. Characters like Miss Wong and Hampton, for instance. This could also be said of Irving, whose absence would have a much more significant impact. Whether or not John Turturro will return for season 3 or eventually season 4 is another question I don't think we can answer. Going into the season, I got a sense from some of the interviews that he might be ready to move on from the show, but everything since then has been less clear. I was surprised to hear him say that he believed there was more story to tell in interviews, while the show seemed to be giving him an ending. It seems like something might be going on behind the scenes, but I don't know what. I'd love to see him come back. He's a core member of the group, and Turturro is responsible for some of the first season's most memorable moments. If nothing else, there are some loose threads, like the question of who he was talking to on the phone, his personal investigation of Lumon, and how he knew about the testing floor in the first place. But as far as the love story with Britt, I could be satisfied if their last scene was the last time we see him. One character who will definitely return is Seth Milchick. He has proven himself fiercely loyal to Lumon and the cult, but that loyalty was continually tested throughout the season. In the finale, it seemed like he might reach his breaking point, but then he doubled down and went down fighting as a company man to the end. One of the things they tried to develop with the non-severed workers on the severed floor is to use them to show how we all self-sever in a way to become a different person at work. I've discussed this in relation to Harmony, who had the extra layer of Mrs. Selvig persona outside the office, which made you wonder how much of Ms. Cobel was a put-on. The show only tells us who Seth is at work and gives us a sense of how he might have ended up as the manager of the severed floor through characters like Harmony and Miss Wong. We've had a glimpse of how this experience was different for him as a black man through the paintings they gave him and his attempt to find an ally in Natalie, but even when he finally pushed back against Drummond, that was focused on the respect he was due based on his current position in the company. Will season 3 be when we finally get to know more about Mr. Milchick, and will he ever be able to switch sides to go against Lumon? Of course, there are quite a few lingering questions from the first season. Some are minor details that would be fun to learn more about, like the stuff we saw on Petey's map, and others are more essential to the story going forward, like James Egan's mention of his revolving. Season 2 provided us with several new ones to add to the list. Things like the mysterious man we see in the hallway when Mark goes into wellness after returning to work after the OTC. Since the same actor is credited as playing him and Shadow Mark from the Ortbo, what about those creepy twins? Will we find out if Gemma willingly agreed to be a subject on the testing floor, or was she duped? I mean, she was definitely at least partially misled, but was she deceived outright, and did they kidnap her? Or how did that whole accident cover-up play out? Also, how did she get on their radar in the first place? Was it from the blood drive or the fertility clinic? And what was so unique about her that they went to these great lengths? Is there really a Hall of Mirrors? Who was doing the voice for Wax Kier when he had his back and forth with Milchick? Will we learn about the Watchers? Dr. Maurer kinda took their place when Cold Harbor was finally ready to go. Is Rickon still gonna get paid to rewrite his book? There are a ton of questions like this, and I'd like to hear yours in the comments. As far as the opening credits sequence, it was surprising to see so many things show up directly in episodes as the season continued. Almost all of the weird details popped up somewhere. The main ones that didn't are what looked like Cobel's car in a lake, the babies on Mark's bed, and in particular, the baby at the end who had Kier's head. Let me know if there are some other ones that you picked up on. To wrap things up, Severance is about many things, but at its core, it's about identity. In an effort to avoid his grief, Mark splits himself in two so that he can check out for half of the time and still collect a paycheck. That choice created someone who primarily saw themselves as a tool rather than a complete person. As any Mark sort of comes of age and discovers his humanity through the people he's found and the awful situation they've been assigned to, and he decides to fight for it and the relationship he found there, you'd like to see that come full circle and help outie Mark confront his issues to become a whole person again. So many different ways that could play out, and so many other interesting characters along for the ride at the end of this season. Helly bringing up the equator was really fitting for her and Mark S., and it's fitting for the larger story as well. It's hard to say where things will go next, which is fantastic, and I think that's a great place to leave things. Oh, and yeah, they need to bring Severance down, even if Lumon might be too big to fail. Gotta do that by all means. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.
Lumon Goon.